Hey, hello, hi, what's good? Welcome to Going Together. My name is Ada Ying, the girl on the go, the girl you just got to know. Yeah, I don't know if I should be introducing myself every single time I start an episode, but it's such a nice way to start things. So nostalgic, it's so right, it just feels right. Anyway, welcome to the second episode of Going Together. Thank you so much for joining me. Before we get into what's been on my mind lately, I thought it would be cool to catch you up on something special that happened recently, specifically on the 16th of May, which was exactly 2 days before episode 1 was released. It was the third Saturday of May. I actually hosted a listening session for that episode. Very bold move, I know, but audacity is my word of the year, so it tracks. I had a bunch of my very awesome friends there to listen to the final recorded and edited episode 1 of Going Together, which I titled Always Alchemizing. Please do give it a listen if you haven't yet. And wow, man, it felt so surreal. You guys really made the beginning of Going Together feel so special. And listen, I know it was all very last minute, but you all showed up and supported me. I thoroughly enjoyed getting your brilliant feedback, our conversations on alchemizing, and just hearing about the ways in which you guys related. All of that just reminded me of how insanely blessed I am to have you guys in my corner. Thanks to you guys, the release day of episode 1, which was on the 18th of May, was actually not as nerve-wracking as I thought it would be. And to all my friends, fam, and lovers who weren't able to make it, but made sure to listen and share, I got nothing but love for you. Every single one of you. Your support is felt and appreciated. And if you're new here, your support and love is also very much appreciated. Glad to have you come along on this journey. Okay, I think now is a good time to get episode 2 on the go. Let's get into the thing that's been on my mind lately, and that is the thin line between self-preservation and self-absorption in our 20s. The reason why this has been on my mind lately is because I've been reflecting a lot on how different my life is now compared to when I was a student living in res. The main difference being the way I viewed self-preservation, which really was just an innocent response to the academic pressure I was facing. I witnessed my life and world get smaller and smaller as I withdrew from the things that brought me color and joy, because I simply got very invested in making sure that I get a decent semester mark for the modules I was registered for, which in turn could get me closer to the finish line. If you know, you know. And that is actually something I low-key took pride in as someone who's always been academically driven. Little did I know that aggressive approach to self-preservation would strip me of some of the fundamental qualities that I appreciated about myself and the kind of life I considered wholesome and fun. It inevitably led to a very self-absorbed way of life. However, 2 solid years later, I'm happy to announce that graduating did the trick, and I've sort of snapped out of my self-absorbed survival ways, and I'm definitely trying my best to restore some order. So that's why for today's episode, I thought it would be a good idea to dive into this self-preservation / self-absorption chat, given that I believe that a lot of us in our 20s can relate and could sometimes do with being nudged back into the right side of the thin line between self-preservation and self-absorption. Before I go any further, let's make sure we're on the same page about the difference between self-preservation and self-absorption. Here's how the Merriam-Webster dictionary defines self-preservation. It says, self-preservation is a natural or instinctive tendency to act so as to preserve one's own existence. Sounds straight to the point, right? Anyway, that made me wonder, how does that manifest in our own daily lives? And that's when I came across some basic examples like eating when you're hungry, seeking shelter in the rain, running when chased by a dog. Hopefully that hasn't happened to you. Alongside those, there were more in-depth examples which I'm sure many of us are familiar with, and setting boundaries was one of them, self-care as well, emotional detachment, avoidance. Listen, the list was long, and I must admit I was guilty of relating a little too much with each example. Now, as for self-absorption, it is defined as being hyper-focused on your own feelings and experiences to the extent that it causes you to lack attention to others. Yikes, hyper-focused, huh? I know that some of you are probably thinking that's debatable, and you're ready to defend your lack of attention to others. Because, come on, you're in your 20s, and that obviously puts you at such a massive advantage to fully lock in on all your aspirations and goals. Because when else will you have this time, this freedom, the physical fitness, and mental agility needed to build the life of your dreams? Like, seriously, when else? So, maybe hyper-focusing on yourself is the name of the game at this stage of your life. Maybe defining it as self-absorption is taking it a little too far. Or you actually couldn't care less because you're on a mission to accumulate as much success as possible, no matter the cost. Because after all, some of us have siblings and parents that are banking on us to win so they can enjoy some returns on their investments, aka black tax. And you know what? I cannot completely villainize you for that, because sometimes minding your own business and preserving your own existence really is the way to go. Since we live in a time where social media provides such a crazy amount of access to other people's business, one might feel justified in choosing to hyper-focus on themselves instead. This may be a means to avoid comparison, forming parasocial relationships, or simply being distracted from your own life, which I fully get. So sure, self-preservation in many instances can prove to be a healthy response to certain changes and experiences we go through in life. It can really be a game changer in this era of our lives, and it's without a doubt a very healthy way to manage our time and energy as a means to preserve our existence. For example, some of us get to uni and study courses that really require us to shift around our priorities, and preserving our time and energy becomes essential to us performing well, or sometimes just surviving academically. And others may have to deal with difficult loved ones that may have taken their kindness for weakness, so they may temporarily withdraw from those relationships as a means to preserve and protect themselves. For some, unfortunately, it takes experiencing some level of burnout or mental breakdown that is a result of them pushing themselves way too hard as they're pursuing different dreams on super tight and unfair deadlines. Now, I know the word self-preservation may sound a bit counterintuitive to some Christians, because when it comes to the preservation of our existence, we are encouraged to leave that to God, since He's the ultimate preserver of our souls, preserves us from all evil and in our coming and going, as Psalm 121 says. And yes, that is all true. God is more than able when it comes to preserving and meeting all our needs. The thing about self-preservation is, just like the definition says, it's instinctive and natural to us as human beings. We are wired to look out for ourselves. And I think the catch is, we as Christians are to do it following God's lead and not just our own moods and personal judgments. My point here is, there are a lot of valid reasons why people choose to self-preserve in different seasons of their lives. And as a Christian, it's only now that I'm beginning to learn how to do it the healthy and godly way. Because to be honest, that's literally the way that we'll always have our best interest at heart, because God is an all-knowing God. He knows what we need for each season and equips us with that very thing. In my experience, when self-preservation is not led by God, it can get very messy very quickly, because we may not always properly identify our own needs and shortfalls, which then leads us to taking extreme and unreliable measures to preserve ourselves. But thank God that even if that's the case, God is ready to catch us and help us navigate it all with His wisdom and love. And although the idea of centering God in your self-preservation may sound like a kind of surrender you're not completely at ease with, given that you may have a somewhat good track record when it comes to following your instincts. But can you take a minute just to imagine how much more better aligned things could be, how less stressful life could turn out if you involved God, your very own creator, in your response to changes and challenges that may trigger some form of self-preservation mode in you. But here's the thing about that self-preservation mode. It's that once we fully activate it and start learning about the self-preservation way of life and actually manage to get consistent at applying those tools, the quality of our lives inevitably improve. And we obviously start to appreciate the impact that setting boundaries, self-care, emotionally detaching from things has on everything. In the early stages, it may all seem so harmless, but when taken too far, the thin line into self-absorption is crossed, and just like that, we've got our lives set up in a rigid and 100% self-serving way. It's all about us. Every day, all day, 24/7. We, just like the definition, become hyper-focused on our own feelings and experiences to the extent that it causes us to lack attention to others. And if anyone dares to point that out, we might have a list of what sounds like good enough reasons, such as, hey, I've got to get that degree, or I've got to lock in for that promotion, or it's the 20s, of course I'm always busy, I've got a future to secure. The crazy thing is, there are people in our lives who affirm those kind of reasons and mentality. It might be our parents, mentors, people whose opinions we really care about. They may even go as far as adding more reasons to our list of reasons. And yes, crossing the line into self-absorption can sometimes feel necessary. It seems we all have managed to convince ourselves that there's nothing wrong with not checking up on friends and family. We all seem very comfortable with only reaching out to loved ones when we need something, and we seem to go to sleep just fine, even after turning down an invitation to hang out with friends because we simply didn't have the capacity to be social. Which is no surprise, by the way, because the longer I'm here on this planet, the more I realize that my capacity alone will not cut it. It will never be enough for anything. Hence my recent inclination towards a more deeper approach to things, the approach that centers God and allows Him to define what self-preservation looks like for me in each season that I go through, and just allow Him to supply everything that I need to blossom, as opposed to me trying to write it out solo with my limited capacity and knowledge. Please allow me to further unpack this capacity perspective, just because I'm aware that a lot of us are quick to use the "I just don't have the capacity" reasoning, which is responsible for the self-absorbed kind of life we end up living. And hey, honestly, it makes so much sense because we really don't have the capacity. And as much as the awareness of that is a great first step in discovering how to practically apply self-preservation tools and methods, what we do after the awareness can become a make or break kind of situation. It can control which side of the thin line between self-preservation and self-absorption we end up on. When you react to the fact that you're low on resources to maintain a certain lifestyle, by trying to calculate and decide what measures to take independently, there's a good chance you might make false conclusions and miscalculate things because, hey, you're human and you're doing this life thing for the first time. Sure, you might seek out help online. The people you look up to as well, you might reach out to them, and this is you just trying to avoid the miscalculation and unnecessary extreme measures. But the thing is, what may have worked for your mentor, older sibling, or even your parent may not work for you. And this is where I remind you of the God-led self-preservation I spoke about earlier. This is where I remind you of God's very own tailored TLC for each individual. As God's children, our capacity to love, share our time, energy, etc., it's unlimited. Yes, believe it or not, it is. This is simply because we are His vessels, and ours is to surrender our lives, challenges, and cluelessness to Him so He can pour out all that we're running low on into us. Because, yes, life tends to kick butt sometimes, and has you rethinking your entire strategy? Has you realizing that indeed you are running low on some essentials? Thankfully, instead of panicking and reacting haphazardly or just deciding to apply someone else's strategy, you can turn to God and, keep it 100. Let Him know all about the chaos that's triggering that urge to do whatever it takes to save yourself. Be honest, be unfiltered with Him. It's okay to admit that we're burnt out and out of contingency plans. It's okay to turn to God for help, for ways to preserve our existence. For honestly, only He alone, I repeat, is the ultimate preserver of our souls. This kind of reliance, I believe, is what makes room for God to move in our lives. It gives Him a chance to reveal to us ways to go about self-preservation in a manner specific for each of us that won't lead to unnecessary isolation and irreversible extreme decisions. How wonderful is that? To firstly have a God that already has a plan for us, and not only that, but He's also willing to take us step by step towards it. And no matter what obstacles we face, when we run to Him, we find new strength, new direction, new hope, new love, new capacity. Okay? We realize we have everything we need, so we don't have to resort to extreme self-preservation methods we assume should work because, I don't know, when you're actually under pressure, it's harder to regulate your version of self-preservation. And that's why it's important to turn to God instead. Unfortunately, that struggle to regulate when under pressure is something I'm too familiar with. If you've gotten a chance to listen to episode 1, you might remember how in it I mentioned that I'm a strict program kind of girl. I mean, that right there is clearly some manifestation of the self-preservation I'm on about right now. Yes, I love self-care routines, structure, and autonomy. This has been a thing for me for as long as I can remember, but I think my transition to university really amplified it. When faced with the academic pressure that threw me into what seemed to be an identity crisis of sorts, the light in me started to grow dim. I no longer had enough of it to share with my loved ones. My very essence was compromised, and it got very clear to me that I would need to withdraw from a lifestyle that would ask of me more than what I could offer. I quickly became a watered-down version of myself, a version I was too ashamed to have exist in spaces and in the company of people who might have been quick to notice the change. So I chose to isolate as a means to preserve the parts of me that still seemed familiar. I chose to preserve my declining energy and my unwavering commitment to that inevitably led to some level of self-absorption that back then I would have quickly defended. This kind of response to the pressure was no surprise because my relationship with God then was hanging on by a thread, with me entertaining controversial takes on Christianity and stuff, basically being a Christian only when it was convenient and comfortable, never really opening enough, surrendering for it to start making meaningful change to my everyday life. I think there comes a time in our 20s where we are all confronted with questions regarding the quality of our lives. And towards the end of my time in university, such questions started to circle my mind. After 6 years of intense practice and commitment to self-preservation, I began reflecting on the kind of life I lived, the kind of energy it carried, the people that were a part of it, and the experiences that shaped me. Questions like, do I like the person I've become? Am I happy with the life I've created? Did this qualification really require all the blood, sweat, and tears? Or was most of it just an overreaction by my nervous system? At the core of my reflection was the questioning of the intense self-preservation I was committed to, and the realization that maybe, just maybe, if I had just leaned on God a little bit more when it came to my preservation, I might have had a less harder time as a student. Now, this was an uncomfortable truth to sit with, and whenever I sat with it long enough, I would be overwhelmed with shame and regret because deep down I knew that a good chunk of the misery I experienced in pursuit of my qualification was most likely self-inflicted and avoidable. Of course, I do try to meet my younger self with some grace, because she was, after all, just a dewy-eyed, stressed-out 18-year-old overachiever, dealing with a lot when she got on the self-preservation train. She was dealing with so much, like her thoughts were just so chaotic all over the place, and just, not in her best self, not in her best version at all. So I'm saying all of this to say, self-preservation on our own terms and conditions will always look and feel promising, but looks and feelings are not reliable when it comes to making life-changing decisions. The thing is, when I decided to pour less into relationships that played a significant role in my mental well-being with the intention of fully focusing on my studies, it felt like a reasonable decision. When I figured out there's no point in having hobbies when under so much pressure, that added up. I also somehow managed to reduce my relationship with God to prayers about my academic performance because at that point, that just made sense. I guess I was in my own problematic way, locking in, choosing to single-handedly determine what my future required and making up my mind that even if I lose my very essence, my peace and my joy, that would not be a big loss as long as I ended up graduating. It's become very clear in my recent reflection that it's that very risk-it-all mentality that our 20s comes with that has most of us treading the line into self-absorption. As in our very own flawed approach to self-preservation, we end up sacrificing and compromising the very self we're trying to preserve. We end up focusing on accumulating and achieving success in its different forms that we forget that the best things in life are truly free. Things like time with friends, time with family, time with self, time with God, time to cultivate love, share it, and receive it in all kinds of ways. Slowing down, letting God lead so we can operate from a place of peace and not anxiety. Understanding that as much as the future is in our hands, our entire lives are in God's hands. And at the end of the day, He's the one that knows and holds the future. He knows just what our role is in it all. This, by the way, is something that I myself am still coming to terms with, and I believe a lot of us could really live much more fulfilling lives if we begin to open up to this approach to self-preservation. While learning about self-preservation in the Christian context, I came across what is now one of my favorite Psalms, that is Psalm 16. I find that it just very perfectly captures the approach to self-preservation that I'm referring to. The psalm leads with this beautiful line: "Preserve me, O God, for in you I put my trust." The psalm wraps it up with this line: "You will show me the path of life. In your presence is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore." Need I say more? Nope. I think I'm just gonna park it here and let you ponder on that. Please do take some time to read through it. I think it will shift your perspective on self-preservation and maybe even help you redefine it in order for it to be more sustainable for you. Okay, by now I think we all have kind of managed to identify some of the ways we ourselves might have crossed the line into the dark side of self-preservation. Maybe not completely, but every now and then we might have been guilty of being hyper-focused on ourselves and might really find it helpful to have some key things to look out for when in doubt. Here are a few, actually just 3, that I can think of at the top of my head, that I think could just help you recognize the difference between self-preservation and self-absorption in real time. And the first one being that it's a you thing. It's a you thing. Instead of letting God shine, you want to prove your smartness, your experience, And I think that's just so human as well. We love it when people just give us credit, for coming out of something because we were just so smart. We just navigated it so well because of our experience. And it's just such an independent thing. And I think as a Christian, that for me is just something to look out for, to avoid making that crossover into self-absorption. Because then that means, the preservation around, the preservation in your life is just very much centered around you and what you can do and everything. Which, you can easily then become very self-absorbed because now it's about you almost looking inward to just try and prove a point to people and then have less time for those very people because you're just so fixated on coming out on the other end and telling them that I did it and I'm fine now or I won. I don't know. It's just weird. We can be very, I guess, about that in our 20s. We would love to get some credit and some things to almost stack as I did that. I did it. And another thing I think is being the taker all the time. You're always taking. You may always expect people to help and support you, but you never do. You never give. You never support. You only call to ask for money. You're always unavailable for hanging out. And you'll just operate from a lack mentality as well. You obviously feel like you don't have the capacity, like we mentioned earlier. So you never have, the time to share with friends and family. You never have energy for that. You never really see or hear others because you're constantly thinking about you and your 99 problems and how to solve them. That's also another way to kind of see that maybe you need to check yourself. Maybe self-absorption is creeping in. And finally, the superiority complex, where you really think that your achievements or popularity or social hierarchy or birth order serve as a reason for people to always think about you and how to improve your life. So you also do that, you're okay, maybe you're in sports and all you know is people pouring into you because they can see the potential, they can see that you can go far. And it's so easy to just then make life all about you and your wins and people investing in you, because in your head you're like, yeah, they're gonna benefit anyway. So you just are convinced that everybody should just give, and you take because of the superiority complex, So let's bring it down a notch. Let's see the people in our lives as much as, yes, they see you also kind of owe them the same. It's a reciprocation, guys. Mutual, kind of energy is just essential to, I guess, sustaining relationships. Yeah. All right, cool. Since we've gotten into some of the things to look out for when in doubt about whether we've taken self-preservation too far or not, I think it's just as important to figure out how we can navigate self-preservation in our 20s in a way that is healthy and sustainable. The following things I'm going to share are actually just some of the few things that I am currently learning and cultivating in order to do that. And you already know that I'm going to lead with letting God lead the self-preservation. That's the number one thing. Remember that God, as your creator, understands how you're wired. As in, he has the spec about you, okay? He's got the 411. So you must rest assured that only he really knows what your strategy is like. What strategies best suit you, like what solutions will preserve you and which will set you back. And as much as social media has all kinds of advice about how we should do the 20s, heavily relying on that is most likely going to be to our own demise. We need to really just bring it all back to God. And yeah, because I know we all tend to have a lot on our plate at times, and it feels overwhelming and difficult to figure out what to prioritize and what to put on ice and who to better do that with you than the one who actually holds and knows the future. Another thing that I think would really help us in, cultivating a healthy and sustainable self-preservation way of life is redefining success for ourselves. The world's definition of success changes every now and then, And I remember listening to this other Bible study, and they made reference to Joseph and the way in which his story is written in the Bible. You'll keep coming across the statement which says, and God was with Joseph and God was with him. And that for me is just something that as I was listening to that Bible study, that was what success was then defined as, is that by God being with you, by you being in his presence, that in itself is success. And I was just like so mind blown by that. I am literally still in awe of that definition, because I feel like it's such an incredible way to look at life, to look at success. And it kind of also helps you not to give into the pressure to be like extraordinary, to put off joy for later because you're out here trying to reach success. And it's like, can you be here in this moment? Can you see what God wants you to see in this moment and be who you need to be in this moment? That in itself is success. And I love that. I love that kind of way of looking at things. And I mean, we're different people, and maybe different things click differently for each of us, but that's what clicked for me. That's really what made so much sense for me. And it just helps to tune out the noise and remember that as much as your pursuit for success is not just about your personal benefit, and yes, it involves your family's benefit as well. Self-absorption is just a quick way to probably lose the essence of those very relationships. Losing the intimacy of being known and truly seen beyond what you can bring to the table. something we all deeply yearn for, whether you're in your 20s or not. And the last thing that I like to share, or at least, I don't know, I think it's second last, is that decide who is worth the pause. Like who's worth that. Sure, our 20s can feel like everything is happening everywhere all at once, but we need to prioritize our relationships. I know we all know of that saying that no man is an island, meaning no matter how well you've proven to be self-sufficient, you're a human being, and human beings naturally have a need for emotional support and community. So let's not make the mistake of believing that our 20s are some sort of exception just because we've been made to believe that this is the one and only decade available for us to cultivate and blossom. It's all a lie. It's not true. There's still so much for God to do in every single decade of your life. It's not limited to this one. So cherish your family, your friends, find your tribe and pour into it. And witness how it will pour right back into you. Set up those catch-up calls. Keep your calendar updated with those important dates. Make it a priority to make sure that you're really just not allowing your 20s to be so self-centered that you lose some people that genuinely could have made the experience a lot more fun, a lot more enlightening. Yeah. And I guess one of the last things I'm going to share is just something that I started last year. I started last year doing this. Like, this is journaling. I used to be a bit anti-journaling because I was just like, I can record. I have the voice recorder thing on my phone. Why can't I just record? But there's something so incredible, actually, that happens when you put pen on paper and you actually write. Because then I think for me, at least, it has been such a nice way to unpack my thoughts and clear my head and make myself a bit open to being loved and loving others. Because like when you have so much on your mind, like you can easily convince yourself that like, yeah, I'm closing everyone out. But when you get it out and you unpack it, whether it's through journaling or creating, you could create stuff, whether it's a song, a poem, different kinds of things. I don't know, crocheting, painting, dancing, whatever the case is. The thing is, you, instead of bottling all those like emotions and energy in, you can actually just create. Right? And it's not about that being beautiful or impressive. It's about you giving yourself the opportunity to see what your subconscious might be carrying that you need to confront and let go of. And that's just something that has made me a bit more open to journaling, a bit more open to creating. That's pretty much all I can share for now. I'm pretty sure that like as we grow older, we'll learn together. We'll figure out more things that help us to preserve in ways that honestly are just so holistically healthy and supportive to our well-being. Yeah. All right, I think it's time to wrap things up. But before I do, I want to say this. I absolutely relate to the 20s being somewhat very heavy on the self-discovery, self-actualization, self-awareness, self-this, self-that. And somehow it's just easy for us to go from innocent self-preservation to full-on undeniable self-absorption. And in the pursuit of all those other things. And that's why I'm inviting you today to consider doing this self-preservation thing with God as you lead. How about that? How about swapping the lack mentality for abundance? How about trusting that the preservation of your existence is not a solo mission, but a you and God mission? And hey, I totally understand the pressure that this decade comes with and how all of it sometimes can have a major impact on the quality of our lives. I'm also aware of how sometimes that pressure can trigger mental health illnesses such as anxiety and depression in some of us. How preserving our existence when faced with such can end up being the toughest challenge we face. And to anyone listening who may be silently battling with that, as someone who's gone through that, I want to assure you that you're not alone. You are never alone. God is with you and wants you to let Him in. He wants to be your ultimate preserver. Also, please do let those who genuinely love and care for you in, so you can start getting the necessary help required to win the battle. I'm sending my love to you. Okay, that's it from me today. To all of you, I'd like to say, no matter what you're going through, please, if there's one thing I hope you take from this episode, is to reject the urge to always isolate in the name of self-preservation. There's just so much power in going through whatever you're going through with someone in your corner. I personally recommend Jesus and believe He will help you connect with the right people at the right time. I also hope this encourages conversations within your circles regarding your personal experiences with self-preservation in your 20s, and it also encourages like an open-mindedness to shifting your perspective and approach to it. Finally, before we part ways, I've got a bit of a side quest for you to venture on after this episode, and that is for you to call a loved one, someone you haven't spoken to in a minute, just to check in. Let's not have any excuse for that. Let's just do it, okay? I know I myself will be dialing up some friends and family I haven't spoken to in a minute. And yeah, this is just us taking a little step towards making sure we are on the right side of that thin line between self-preservation and self-absorption. Well, that's all I have for today. Thank you for listening to episode 2 of Going Together. Till next time, stay blessed.